Pop quiz. How many leitmotifs are in Arknights? If you look it up real quick, you'll be taken to wiki.gg and they'll show you that there's roughly 50 right about now, not including CN, which I'll just kind of exclude for the time being. There are CN spoilers though, so beware. But if you know anything about music, you'll know that this isn't exactly right. I imagine a lot of people would agree with me when I call these operator themes. And yes, I know there are songs that aren't necessarily tied to one operator or even any operator. Either way, I'm not really referring to those right now, so they don't actually matter for now. I'm talking about actual leitmotifs. And yeah, these songs can have some things that may work as a leitmotif, such as But what makes a leitmotif is how it's used outside of its original context. The idea of a leitmotif is to get you to remember something specific, either a character or a theme or something like that. Because these aren't used outside of just the song itself, these can't qualify as leitmotifs. There is one exception, being "From the open shore I will learn to fly, soaring past the great divide." But I'll leave that for later. So I should mention, I am definitely not a musical expert here, I'm just someone who listens to Arknights music a little too much. And after listening to them for long enough, I've eventually picked up a few. So yeah, let's just get into the first obvious one. For those of you who don't know, Kreide is an NPC from the event Lingering Echoes. And if you've seen Kreide be mentioned in the wild, you can probably guess what's happened to him by the end of the event. This track is used in 3 places, with the first being the main menu of Lingering Echoes. The second place this is used is in the boss theme. This is pretty obvious, nothing groundbreaking, even though it's an Ebonhold's event, so people say. It very much is about Kreide as well, so the fact that his theme is in the main menu and, surprise surprise, he's the boss, does not really shake up anything. However, when it comes to the new event, Zwillingstrom im Herbst, or however you pronounce it, you might not have heard it while playing through the game. That's because you have to go outside of Arknights to find it. Okay, there's that one scene in the story that directly references it, but that's not really something new, so we don't count that. In the OST, there are 2 tracks that are both called The Theme. These are used for the different music modes in the boss fight, but what makes this interesting is that the variant version has an extra bit that the Imperial version doesn't, that only shows up on the OST. They probably cropped out the extra bit just to keep the 2 tracks in time with each other mid-game so it sounds nice when they switch between. But that's not really an issue in the trailer, because it's just a trailer, there's only 1 track. That's how I originally found the bit. And somehow that ended up being my most popular video on YouTube. Huh. Regardless, I want to say this is Kreide's theme and not the Witch King's theme because the Witch King's theme is the theme. The leitmotif itself is really only used when Kreide is related in some way, so yeah, it's Kreide's. Anyways, that's the easy one out of the way. Next up, 2 dragons and the Tarans. What the Firelight cast has quite the enchanting OST, and it helps greatly that the story itself is really compelling. I'm not going to get into the details, that's a whole video on its own, but I will say this is one of my favorites. So what did I mean 2 dragons and the Tarans? Well, As you might be able to guess, there are two leitmotifs in here, at least in my opinion. The story of Eblana and Reed is definitely tied to the story of Tara, as that's what they're fighting for, that's where all of this comes from. But that's not the whole story, I feel. The actions and choices of the people, what they're thinking, how they feel, who they choose to follow, where they choose to go, what they choose to do, that's them. They've earned their place in the story, they've earned their own leitmotif really. So yeah, it's this bit. How I like to interpret this is that in the lobby theme, the people were still trying their best to live, to survive, to deal with the fact that they got kicked out by the Victorians, all that stuff. But as the battle theme kicks in, they choose to fight. They choose to stand up for themselves, pick up arms, and push for a better future. Though, for those following Eblana, since the common NPC has a leitmotif, it'd be pretty strange if the two stars of the show didn't have one for themselves, wouldn't it? The event is almost entirely about how Reed chooses a different form of authority over Eblana. While Reed is about picking up the pieces and trying to work towards a better future, Eblana is about taking things back by force, going to war, and frankly stepping into business that she really shouldn't, regardless of how justified she is in doing so. The leitmotif itself kicks up the lobby theme, but comes up all over in the boss theme. As usual, I used it for the transition, but it also comes over the horns for the main body of the piece. There's also specifically a part with a woodwind instrument, either a flute or a recorder, I'm not quite sure, but to me, that bit represents Reed's bit in all of this, how she's fighting back against her sister for once instead of just being her shadow or running away from being her shadow. Here's an interesting bit. The leitmotif plays in two different versions basically, one with the Dies Irae tied to it, and then the flute version I was talking about, which is how I see this juxtaposition of character. As the track progresses, you hear the leitmotif in multiple spots, and it's great because it keeps changing, almost as if it's trying to keep up with new developments in the fight. I love this event. I know I said that before, but seriously, give it a read if you haven't. Okay, honorable mentions time, because we're like halfway through, I think. I don't know, I don't write scripts anymore. Or at all, I guess. First one, Manfred. The funny thing about Manfred is that he's got two songs, one for the regular boss fight and one for the H stages. Yeah, I don't really know the context of why he has two, or if he's the only boss that has two, but it's interesting. I could dig deeper, honestly. I just don't feel like it. We're just gonna say Manfred has one, but again, it's just kind of an upgraded version of the first one. It's not really a leitmotif, just the same song, twice. There's a lot of repeating parts, such as the and also the and then there's the we're just gonna leave it at that. This next one's a bit special because you probably know what it is even without me telling you. Here, give it a listen. Yeah, despite being an honorable mention, it's really iconic. What can I even say about this one? It's not so much any single line, but more so that ephemeral singing that pops up anywhere you see the Seaborn or anything related to Scotty, Skelter, Isharmala, you get the idea. You can make an argument for any of the common note patterns, but these kind of blend together for me, so I just gave up and lumped them together and put them in the honorable mentions corner. There is an interesting trend I've noticed specifically with Stultifera Navis, and that's that it's not as present because Stultifera Navis as a whole, despite still being really tied in with Aegir and Seaborn and whatnot, it's more so about Iberia, which makes sense, right? The whole aesthetic is more Iberian than the other Seaborn events. You know, all the gold accents and whatnot. So you end up hearing this sort of thing more so in Undertides and a bit in IS-3. The main instance of that being in the boss fight, obviously, when you fight Isharmala directly. Even though I don't consider it a proper leitmotif, it's very interesting how anything of this sort could just show up. As an example, look at Operation Deepness, obviously the one based on Undertides. The song for that CC starts off with one of these whales. I'm pretty sure it's actually strings in that case, but the point still gets across. Yeah, it's kinda neat. Okay, honorable mentions over. Let's talk about one of the big ones. You know her, you love her and or hate her, it's W. It's Renegade. Admittedly, this one's still cheating because it's still only one song used in multiple places, but I mean, come on. Those 4 notes have such a strong impact that how could you not realize it's W as soon as you hear it? As far as I know, there are 3, technically 4 places where this shows up. One is the EP itself, of course. 2 is Arknights Memoir 1B4, where they first introduced W. And 3 is in the Arknights Memoir rerun trailer. And if you're wondering why it's specifically the rerun, for those they find a different character to speak over the footage just to make things more interesting. For Arknights Memoir specifically, W is just such an iconic character that it just works, right? Maybe it's because the song is so popular, or maybe it's just because W is such an important character, but it gives flair to something as simple as a trailer. The 4th place this shows up is in Ambience Synesthesia 2023, where they just played Renegade. I mean, it's the year where W is going on like a phantom heist, of course they're gonna play Renegade. Though, I'm a little bummed that for her new song, it doesn't come up at all. I'd say that's more a case of song unrelated than anything, really. It's kind of a shame because W is debatably the character who evolved the most over Arknights' lifetime, starting with Reunion W, going backwards to Arknights Memoir W, till Chapter 7, Chapter 8 W, who is slightly different from Chapter 10 W. Unlike Chen, who got left in the dust after Chapter 8, W has been there the whole time and has been growing as a character. If you ever wondered why they stopped using Amiya Kelsey Chen and started using Amiya Kelsey W, that's why. Though, shout out to the time they used both. That was cool. Also, shout out to Amiya Kelsey Resmontis, which was a thing between W and Chen. Poetically, I don't think it's as strong, but thematically it's really nice because that's the Rhodes Island family. It has nothing to do with W, I just really want to mention that because I don't really get the chance to mention that anywhere else. Back to W's leitmotif, I do think it has a lot more flair than Let's On. It's relatively simple, but that kind of matches how W wants you to see her. To quote a friend of mine, regarding W, the only thing that you gotta know is that she does what it takes. She does what it takes. Hey! What I find really notable about this is that this is not the leitmotif. The leitmotif is not in the main chorus. At least for me, this is a good sign of, for all the bravado she puts on about being a major threat, she's actually covering really hard for how well she's trying to survive. I've always associated this part with the Chapter 7 version of W, where she's just left Reunion, she has no one to turn to, she's all alone, and she's trying her best. It's basically a song about what she wants you to think she is, or what people perceive of her, but not really about what she's thinking internally. Of course, it's a bit outdated, but for the time, it really works for who she is. So there's 2 more I want to talk about, and I want to save the best for last, but the other one is a CN spoiler, so if you don't want those, skip to this timestamp. In the meantime, have a random Tomimi. The CN spoiler is not Tomimi involved, I swear. Don't worry about it. Just click the timestamp thing. Get out of here. Seriously, there are spoilers. Alright, is that everyone? Okay, cue the song.
I like it that way, and I'm never gonna change.
Remember how I said I'm saving the best for last? Yeah, no, this is it. This is the best, and it's not even close. Between all the 6-star alters, most weren't originally 6 stars and thus don't have their own song. Aya was given a seasonal song, which doesn't amount to much. I already talked about Scotty, who got. And then Chen is just really
Unsatisfied with your life.
This leaves W as the only character with any form of continuity between her two songs. If that doesn't make W's leitmotif the best by default, I don't know what does. It helps of course that the songs are both good, but it also helps that W really is the only character with progression. Keep in mind that I'm not a CN player and I don't know the specifics, but from what I've heard, the operator named Wiš'adel isn't just another codename W came up with. Supposedly, she chose this as her actual name, which is a big point in her own story. That actually ties in very well with something I think is interesting about this song, especially when compared to Renegade. Here's the question. Who's the song actually about? W, right? I think by all accounts that's true, but at least in Renegade, there's another very important person, and that's you. Go back and listen to the song. There's a lot of lyrics which are very explicitly about, hey, this woman is crazy and you'd better be careful. You'd better watch what you're doing. You'd better pay attention. I didn't realize it at the time, but on second listen, or however many times I listened to the song at this point, it really shows off that W was a villain, right? She was a threat, she was the bad guy, she was someone who was in reunion but now is on her own, but still not with us. By framing the song in practically second person, it really shows the distance, which I think is really cool, especially moving on to Arsonist, where the song is more so in first person, W singing and talking about herself. She's not just acting crazy as a defense mechanism, she legitimately is crazy now. You can argue that's very weak character development, but I think it's enough. You could come to this assumption by looking for the leitmotif again. Unlike Renegade, where it's kind of the chorus, the W leitmotif shows up in most of the song. Wiš'adel is of the lucky few who has an animated short to her name. And by short, I mean it's 15 minutes long, making it the longest Arknights official 3D PV out there. Can you guess why I'm bringing this up? If not, just go watch it, you'll understand. I can talk about the short and about how they use the music, but I feel like this is a thing that definitely deserves a watch first, and I really don't want to speak because again, I don't have full context, and the segment's getting long, so we gotta bring it to a close at some point. Wow, this is 18 minutes already. So how's that for rambling? I don't really have a way to end this segment, so let's just end it here, I guess. I think W has the best leitmotif, and it's not even close. Let's bring Tamimi back, I guess, and let's just jump scare the non-spoiler people, because why not? I was thinking of this joke, and then I saw someone else do it, so I was like, huh, might as well pull it off once. Why not? And that's why I think Tamimi Alter has the best leitmotif. Oh, wait. Hi, non-spoiler people. Sorry about that. Ignore that. That doesn't exist. That's not true. Moving on. The best and the last. Well, it's debatable whether or not this is the best, but regarding my first statement of the only operator themes that are leitmotifs, this comes the closest. So, win by default, I guess. I'm gonna admit right off the bat that talking about Spectres is much more difficult than any of the ones up to this point. Unlike the first few, where the event actually uses the leitmotif, and unlike W's, where the lyrics makes more sense, this leitmotif is very abstract in comparison. In my interpretation of the song, there is an idea of working within your limitations and breaking free and whatnot, but you can't beat the simplicity of the song literally telling you she's a mercenary. You can't rival her unless you're revolutionary. It's safe to say the song is about Spectre. It's Spectre's song after all. But more specifically, I think it's about the divide between Laurentina and Spectre, as that's a big part of their character. Laurentina has stated previously that to her, Spectre is just another person she needs to get along with, but generally she's been taking it pretty well. Spectre isn't an antagonist or even an obstacle in Laurentina's eyes. Of course, Spectre does cause issues for Laurentina's well-being, mentally and whatnot, but it doesn't stop her. She tries her best, she does what she can, and if she can't, she can't. Spectre is Laurentina, just as Laurentina is Spectre. That idea of working with what you have, not so much fighting your limitations, but doing your best within them, it's a good message, isn't it? So, why is this a leitmotif? It's used twice in the 3D trailer for Stoltifer Novice. The first instance is when Laurentina first awakens after Spectre touches the broken mirror. This is pretty direct, Laurentina waking up, emerging from the darkness, you know, that stuff. The only time we've seen Laurentina prior to this was at the end of Undertides. Since that event was more so for Scotty, Spectre was railroaded into just being awakened. Admittedly, the Stilty Fair Nava story does kind of the same thing, where just being near the ocean long enough awakens her, but in the trailer, it's something more of an action, a declaration. She is doing something that causes this. So when the transformation finishes and we see Laurentina for the first time here on her own feet, we get It's elegant, it's grand. What's not to love about this scene? It really tied Specter and the Leitmotif together, even if we didn't hear the actual song Awaken until weeks later when it actually released.
Is it still the same if I let them in and I sail to calmer time?
So how do I explain that? This small snippet is really the bane of my whole argument. Specter barely appears, we get a lot of Irene, and Aegir is shown for the first time. Also, this is very haunting compared to how both the PV and the song itself use the leitmotif. So let me just go off on a limb here. If we assume Irene represents Iberia, then we could assume that the main conflict is fighting the Seaborn. That's what they've been dealing with this whole time, after all. There's a big power gap with how prolific, expansive, and alien the Seaborn are, but they still try their best, doing what they can to fight the Seaborn off for as long as possible. What I'd like to take this as is HG pointing at the very clear next step to fighting the Seaborn. You know, the people who made the Abyssal Hunters. The group that's really good at fighting Seaborn. And if that's not enough evidence for you, well, just look at Discover Terra 3. That's pretty on the nose, wouldn't you say? It's not exactly what I said about Specter, but I think it still falls close enough, being the idea of fighting as hard as you can, regardless of how outclassed you are. And I think that's it for the video. Yeah. Despite how little AK puts effort into tying music to story, I think it's really nice that little snippets like this exist because it shows that there could be so much more in just a few notes. I really hope AK, or at least whoever's in charge of the music, does more of this because it's always really cool, you know? Just little things that gives the world of Arknights just a bit more flavor. Arknights music in general has evolved over the years, and though they don't really do this stuff, it's still really interesting how each song depicts a character or a group or a place. But as we go to new places and meet new people, I'm excited to see what AK does.